right here on WLOU. Stream it live on Facebook and WLOUonline.com. And now, the Tipping Point Show.
And family, good people out there in radio land, those of us here online, shout out to everybody because it's a new, beautiful, wonderful, amazing Saturday. Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. It is your boy, Mr. Just As Joe, as well as my brother from another mother, Brother John Yah, Esoteric Concepts. How you doing there, family?
I'm good, brother. How about yourself this morning?
Oh man, I am fantastic. Just finished making a beautiful cup of coffee. You know, I don't use a lot of those mixes and things of that nature. I try to, actually grab grains and put it in a mix to make my coffee. You know what I mean? Sometimes I even save the grains and use them for other things. You know, if you ever looked up stuff like that, like what all you can use, leftover grains or tea for and stuff like that, leftover tea leaves.
Yeah, well, definitely on some tea leaves, but I'm always trying to find something new to put in my tea. I just started, of course I was doing the mullein leaf, and now I'm starting to do the fulvic acid and dipping it into my tea now. Also getting some extra minerals into my tea, so I use that now in my tea. The tincture, the fulvic acid tincture.
Okay, got you. All right, good stuff. Now I've been. You said tincture, right?
Tincture, yeah. Where it's in little droplets.
Little droplets, yeah.
Put it in little drops.
Yeah, I'm learning more about that. I have recently been focused on CBD a lot, getting into the CBD business, and they have the CBD tinctures and things of that nature. So definitely some healing properties there as well. But hey, man, with that in mind, we've got a great show coming up ahead. We've got an awesome guest coming up as well, and really just have some awesome conversation to be had. And I'm excited for this show. But what's been happening in your week this past week, brother?
Same old thing. Putting products out, and I'm enjoying the fact that people are loving the Saya Baba and Soap Stick brand. Coming out with some new smell. Came out with one just this week called Common Sense, right?
Oh man.
So we definitely need a lot of common sense. So I'm starting to learn about using subliminal messages inside the name of my product. We started doing with Soap Stick with positive affirmation. Did so well. I'm starting to move over to some of that with the Saya Baba brand, but a little bit slight different, and looking at moving away certain fragrances that we are going to discontinue.
Got you. Well, that's good, man. That's good. That is absolutely awesome. And again, man, I'm just excited when I hear you tell anything about your business, man, because you've come a long way, and you've done great with your business, and you're an example in a lot of ways when it comes to business, man. So appreciate what you do and how you do it. It'd be awesome and amazing. What if every company out there focused on making sure positivity was involved in creating their product from every angle? You know what I mean? That would just be awesome. Hey, are you not feeling positive today? You know what? Here's a paid leave absence. You can't work today.
That's right.
Because we can't have that energy in our product, man. That would be dope if people were to do that. But yeah, man. So I know myself personally this week. really what I've been focusing on a little bit more is trying to get back to a little bit of at least a day of relaxation a week, which is something that I kind of have been going hard for a while, and just every day my head in the grind, but trying to get back to just taking a little bit of time out and focus on family a little bit more. I know this week I had a chance to grab my son and go have dinner with him and stuff like that. So it's been kind of awesome just kind of getting back into that. So I'm thankful for that. It's that time of year where people talk about this Thanksgiving pagan holiday,
Yes.
and I'm thankful nonetheless of any trials and tribulations, man. So shout out to brother Frank Stoner, Grand Rising. Already up, giving us a listen and giving us a comment. Folks, as our guest comes up, remember 502-776-1350. You can call in and holler at our guest, Mr. Just As Joe, Brother John Yah. Just give us a call, 502-776-1350, and you can talk to any one of us there. But man, a lot going on this week, man. I guess was it Kyle Rittenhouse that he was shown as innocent, right? What
Found not guilty.
found not guilty,
Yes, sir.
right?
He was acquitted.
What you think
Yeah.
about that, man? I was on Clubhouse last night and I was listening in. Clubhouse is a fun little hideaway from time to time, and I was listening in, and one girl made an amazing comment that I thought was amazing. She said, "Why are black people so concerned about this, considering the man didn't kill no black people?" I don't know. Maybe if it's because he killed what would be considered black allies, and
No, he
because
did shoot. He did shoot someone that was. He did shoot someone that was black.
he did. Okay.
Yeah.
But as far as who was killed, I guess it was no black people. But nonetheless, what's your thoughts on that, man? It's an interesting topic.
Well, yeah. Well, I kind of followed the trial part. Of course, I've always been interested in trial drama, which is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm kind of writing about. But so I watched part of the trial. I posted some of the stuff where the judge was kind of outrageous. I thought it was a judge automatically on the side of the defense. However, looking at the evidence and listening to the evidence, they had some information that didn't come out until trial, while people were gaslighted on the information and didn't know that this young boy who had a gun, who claimed that he was going to go out and shoot some people to go and protect property, a few days before, he goes out there with the gun, but he gets chased. People kick him. A young man kicked him while he was on the ground. Another young man that was killed chased him down, throwing stuff at him, and he turned around and shot him. Now, you cannot go into that and say that this young man was not defending himself, but others will say, well, what is he doing down there with the gun? Of course,
Yeah.
and the judge made it clear, just because he made the statement of going down there, he had no intentions of acting like a vigilante. And that's just when you're chased. When you're chased by someone, you got a gun, I'm hollering, why are you running? You got the gun, right? And so he was clearly defending himself according to the FBI release videos and photos that they did not release until trial. So people were running around gaslighted, hollering, and upset, but the FBI had the real recording of what was going on, that young man was chased down. So as I looked at the videos, I knew there's no way they're going to find this young man guilty. He's a young, white, all-American looking boy. They're going to be all on his side for that. And I saw even the judge say some things. I'm hoping to get on talk to this about with on Carr's show. I know he's going to cover it.
Yeah,
Where the judge act like
shout out to
he was
Carl.
automatically on the defense. Yeah. So I found it to be unemotional. At least I'm not emotionally concerned with it. I was just looking at the technical part of the trial, and I knew that this young boy would be found not guilty, not because anything funny, was because the true information came out in trial, that they were doing in public opinion crucifying him, and most black people would get highly upset if you thinking that someone was getting away with somebody murdering somebody. Like, I get all of that, but actually, if you look at the trial and if you know how trial works, you'll see a little bit of a different opinion when you look at the evidence for real. That's why I don't like trial by media. People just get emotional and say he's guilty, but now you have not sat in the trial and actually look at the real evidence.
Well, what do you think about this comment here, Brother John? Shout out to Colette Diaclin on online there on Facebook. Remember, folks, the Tipping Point Radio Show on Facebook. She says this just proves how white justice works, because there's no way a black person would not would not allow that. I guess there's no way a black person that would have been allowed to happen if it were a black person. What do you think about that?
I disagree with that. Based upon a person of myself who's been to trial before, who've experienced 3 trials in my life and know how it works. I've been found not guilty of 2 trials actually, and so
you had some serious time over your head
correct
time in each 2 of those cases, and you were found not guilty. But it was because you focused on studying the law, and you used the law to get yourself out of it. I think a lot of times, we get so emotional, bro. We get so emotional, and sometimes we cannot see past our emotion, or sometimes we can't see past our color, if you will. And we get so emotional.
Well, let me say this. She is absolutely right.
Yes.
In what she is saying. She's right in what she's saying, but not absolutely right in the totality of the picture. And it's based upon the judge, what kind of judge you got. It's based upon the prosecutor, what kind of prosecutor you got. And it's based upon the jurors. So, I learned how to use the system in my favor. And this is what we got to learn how to do. We got to learn how to not become victims. And instead, we say, I see the system, let me learn it, and let me use it for my benefit. When I started learning the system, I knew how to make it work in my favor. And so that's the difference of what white people do and what we don't do. We don't know how to use the system in our favor. Like, I'm a fan of the Constitution. I'm highly a fan. I'm highly of a fan of the Constitution, right? Because it actually works. And we need to understand that constitutional right and how we can use it for our benefit. Those who don't will automatically run to the corner and say, hey, I'm a victim. The system don't work. Here's why it don't work.
Hey, real quick, John. Hey, Jay is that our actual guest calling in, or is that a caller that's calling?
Sir, you're actually your guest.
Okay, all right. So we'll bring her on here in 1 second here. But Kari Muhammad, he says not allowing people that were killed to be mentioned as victims was a bizarre move by the judge. So that I guess that's one of the things that you said as well, that the judge did some bizarre things or made some bizarre moves, and maybe that's one of them right there. Do you think that should have been allowed or not?
The only thing that I saw that was odd to me is when the judge removed a statement that the young man mentioned a few days before the act, telling someone that he was going to go down to kill someone. That information was inadmissible in trial. The reason why, again, is that he went down there and he didn't end up killing nobody that he was going after. In fact, he killed the person that was pursuing him. You cannot call that person a victim. If the person is pursuing you and you turn around and shoot them, meaning standing your ground, you can't call that person who's the predator a victim. You can't do that.
I feel like you always got to put yourself in that person's shoes a lot of times. And if I were being chased whether I had a gun or not, if I took some people out that were chasing me, then I don't feel that I should be uh locked up or anything like that. I should be found not guilty because again, it's an act of self-defense. But speaking of self-defense, there's a lot of people out here that are not able to defend themselves, children especially, and even as they get older, they grow up, they deal with some type of trauma. Because today's show is about sexual trauma, and those children grow up, become adults, and you have to wonder about the rug that things get swept under as those children deal with that trauma throughout their life and what happens as they become adults. With that being said, without further ado, we want to go ahead and introduce our guest today, which is Michelle Steelwagon, who is a licensed or certified sex therapist, licensed family, marriage, and family therapist. Michelle Steelwagon, welcome to the Tipping Point Show. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming on today. You have myself and Brother John Yah, Esoteric Concepts, here with you. And again, folks, I do want to put the disclaimer out there. If you did not see the title of the show or anything like that, that this is a show about sexual trauma. So, it could be triggering for any survivors out there. So I just want to put that out there and let that be known, so that you can act accordingly. All right. With that being said, Michelle, if you would please kind of just introduce yourself and your accreditations, and tell us
Sure.
real quick how you got to this point to be a marriage and family therapist as well as a certified sex therapist, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means after that.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, first of all. And I'm in private practice here in Louisville. I'm a marriage and family therapist, licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Kentucky, and also a certified sex therapist with ASEX, as you said. Um, I've been doing work with families and children and community mental health for several years, uh, and in the homeless shelters for several years prior to actually going into the marriage and family therapy program. And that just was a good fit for me because I really wanted to have a rapport and a relationship with clients. And often when you're part of the um, social work system or some of the agencies, there's a lot of turnover. And so you don't get a whole lot of relationship time with folks once they leave a shelter or have to move through and kind of graduate through an agency program. So I decided to do the marriage and family therapy program so I could work with folks on a more, still short term, but a little more as they needed it through their life transition. Um, and then I saw a lot of couples organically, that kind of couples and women tended to be the folks that kind of migrated to my practice in the Highlands. And so I kind of felt like a plumber who couldn't fix the toilet when I didn't have the sex therapy piece to back me. And so I went ahead and did some voluntary certification for that through ASEX. And so I did another 500 clinical hours and education and all of that supervision out of pocket just to make sure I was top notch in terms of what I did know. So I work a lot with folks who have abuse backgrounds, and I'm trained in EMDR to help with that as well, which is an intervention. And then I work with people who have medical issues, pain with sex, all sorts of like health and just sexual wellness kind of issues, as well as desire discrepancy, couples issues, LGBTQIA issues, or not even issues, but couples too. So I'm a very kind of diverse specialty across the spectrum because sexuality and embodiment is part of our life.
Let me ask you before I ask you this question. I want to say that this is a broad subject here that we are going to address, which want to try to focus on the children, abused children, and how they come up to be an adult, to where now you are into their sexual habits and needing therapy on it, and how it relates to as a child. Now, everyone who's listening, please share this information if you know of anyone that has been abused or in that subject. Please share this information, because this is very, very important. We have a lot of this going on in our families, and we need to get it out and talk about it and not cover it. Now, with that said, when we're talking about sex abuse for a child, tell us the effect that could have on a child when they become an adult. Would it make them promiscuous and having lots of sex and just with no rules of having sex, or would it make them, or could it do both and make them also shine away from sex and not feel comfortable having sex?
Well, it's interesting. Good question. It's interesting. Everyone has a different response to trauma, of course. So yes, the answer is, it can swing both ways. But also, there can be an aversion to sex. There can be pain with sex, because your body naturally, especially if you're young, it wants to kind of not have things come in it or be on it that it doesn't want. So even if you're too young to be able to comprehend that, intellectually, your body keeps score. Your body remembers what has happened to you, and your body can sense the things that trigger you, can have reactions that you don't anticipate, depending on if there's any kind of injury or that kind of thing. That can have long-term effects. Some people do become more interested in finding their power back, and they become more sexual. Some people feel like they are kind of damaged goods after something happens to them, and so they allow themselves to be used more, or in relationships that aren't healthy for them, and kind of can really suffer from that self-esteem issue. Just not knowing, when somebody loves you in a way that's inappropriate, and you're too young or just old enough to kind of understand this isn't right, or too young to really do anything about it, because we're under the guise of our parents and of our grandparents and the persons that are our adults, right, who take care of us. We're under their power and control, right, until we're 18. So if you're 12, there's not much you can do, and so it's really binding, especially if it happens within the family system. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of a broad answer, but there's a lot of different responses to trauma, and also just attachment, not being able to attach well to someone, not being able to have a healthy relationship, kind of being in and out of relationships, but not understanding why. Because it's hard to have a healthy relationship with yourself, or the idea of love, or with a person who, is supposed to love you, when there's been such a betrayal in a way that's been modeled for you from the get-go.
Now,
can a person who has been sexual abused have problems with confusing themselves with being heterosexual or homosexual? Would being abused at an early age confuse them as they grow up?
So that's a tricky question. What I would say is, you know yourself, and if you, as you become, a lot of times development is arrested. Put it that way. When you're sexually abused, or just abused in general, your emotional self can sometimes arrest at that age. So let's say you're 5 when you're abused. You're going to grow up, and you're going to become more intelligent and have a variety of emotions, but there might be some things that are difficult for you to process, because there is this young self that is very wounded. That can cause a lot of confusion, especially like if there's been misogyny, if there's been a if it's somebody in your family who has sort of internalized for you that you're bad or that something's wrong with you and that's why this is happening to you, having to keep those toxic secrets can really confuse a person just in general in terms of their emotional stability. But heterosexual, homosexual is something you just know about yourself, or transgender even. You know if you fit into your body, you know if you're attracted to other people as you become that are same sex or opposite sex or or if you're asexual and not attracted to sex at all, or if you're kind of somewhere else on the spectrum of sexuality and can just fall in love with a person regardless of gender orientation. That's not something. A lot of times people ask when they find out about identity or identity shifting, even especially with there being more folks that are transitioning and coming out as transgender and as non-binary. There's always a question of, were you abused? And I think that can be pathologizing. I think we have to be careful of that for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, because there's nothing wrong with them. They didn't do anything, and nothing happened to them to make them shift. There's a shift, that's who they are. But there can be some confusion, sexually and identity-wise, because of experiences that might turn on a body but turn off a mind. And if your body responds to something with a same-sex person, you might wonder if you're gay. You might wonder if that's happening to you, but that doesn't mean that you are, or that that is who you are, or that is going to become who you are. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Absolutely. Question. You notated something. You said that when we talked about which way they can go as they become adults, and you said in one way they can become more sexual, trying to find their power back or get their power back. Now in my mind, I'm thinking becoming more sexually promiscuous, right? Is it, when you say finding their power, getting their power back, is that the same thing in that sexual promiscuity as they get older, or what exactly?
I mean, it can look like that.
Okay.
It can look like that, and this isn't just for women, but I think I've experienced it more in my practice with women. If you are in a powerless situation where you're
okay.
If you're in a powerless situation, I think that was my alarm. If you're in a powerless situation where you are completely being taken advantage of, you're being harmed, you're being hurt, you don't have any control of your body or what's happening to it. It may be that it doesn't that you seek a redefining, a reconnection with yourself as a sexual self and your body that can lead to exploring more, being with more people, having more one-night stands, because you're trying to reestablish how and kind of reconnect with your sex and your sexual self without somebody else being in charge of it. I do think that some people can be unhealthy in the way that they treat themselves. As I noted earlier, people can feel like they're damaged goods, and that can make for a different kind of promiscuity, maybe, or maybe just letting themselves be in relationships where they're not cared for, or that they're taken advantage of, or that they continue to be hurt. And those can be sexual relationships that continue to hurt them.
Wow.
What are the chances of someone who was sexually abused? What are the chances of them becoming abusers themselves when they become adults?
I don't know the statistics that are most recent, but It certainly can happen. I think it depends on the level and acuity of the abuse, and kind of how sadistic it was. If somebody's sort of personality ruptures or their trauma is so significant that they're so stuck in that place where mentally and emotionally they already think of themselves as a bad person or can't move out of that. There is, or they, become more sociopathic and have no empathy because they had to kind of, manage what was going on in a way that just sort of took them to completely out of themselves or completely out of didn't have any model, of kind of normative, typical, loving, caring, nurturing, attachment behavior. So yes, it can happen. I don't know what the percentage is. Certainly for those people that do become predatorial, the recidivism rate is really high. So, if somebody is a pedophile or an abuser, a rapist, the likelihood that it happens more than once, even if they're caught or having, have some consequence to it, there is a pretty high recidivism rate for that. And so looking at how to help people that are in the situation where they've experienced something traumatically and it's led to them being predatorial, and trying to figure out how, if at all, how to treat that more compassionately is something that we struggle with as a culture.
So,
or punitive.
So, just as we look at some of this, there's a comment out there. Shout out to Johnny Wakefield. And just think about this for a second. I think people who have been sexually traumatized or sexually traumatized children, when they grow up, they need to be mindful of those they allow themselves to be intimate with, meaning their partner should be cognizant of what they've been through and have a certain level of understanding when it comes to their trauma and how they can, or how that can play out unconsciously. The question is, should a person who has been sexually traumatized, when they get into a serious relationship, should they just openly go ahead and divulge that information to their spouse or significant other? Or is that something they keep to themselves?
It certainly would be in best interest of anyone having partnered sex to be able to disclose that, so that if there is a trigger response, if there is something that creates difficulty within desire, drive, ability for body to arouse correctly, or not correctly, but typically, so that the partner doesn't take that personally and feel like, oh, I can't turn my partner on, I'm a bad lover, or they're just not interested in me, they're not attracted to me, because we tend to kind of take things out on ourselves when we don't understand what's going on with a person that we're close to and care about, and we feel the rejection or the disconnect. Also, a lot of trauma victims can disassociate during sex, and so if a person understand what that is, so ultimately, yes, that would be the healthiest thing. But there is so much shame and internalized shame around this bad thing happened to me, and often people blame themselves for it for a long time. It's very difficult to work through that it's not your fault kind of stuff, so kind of work. So it depends on how healthy the relationship is, how trustworthy the partner is, and also where the person that was abused is in terms of their ability to thrive and accept that happened to them, and may have consequences without that feeling super shameful.
And Michelle, do sexually traumatized kids end up with abusive lovers or spouses throughout their life more so than not?
I mean, as I said, that certainly is one of the consequences, or one of the kind of responses that can occur. That people have low self-esteem, they feel like they're broken, they feel like they're damaged, and so they end up picking partners that continue to sort of feed that monster. And yeah, so I mean, I think with any kind of ruptured attachment, or not knowing how to attach in a healthy way to persons, there's going to be a response that may end up more likely to be with persons that treat you poorly or take advantage of the fact that you're in need or desperate for love. Predators can feel that, and they will take advantage of that. I see a lot of that on dating sites. Someone who is, really open and seeking may be taken advantage of by someone who recognizes that they have an in with this kind of sensitive, vulnerable person, and you do have to be careful who you date and who you're intimate with, and make sure that you're kind of working on the stuff that you need to feel like you can be and deserve to be in a healthy relationship, which is where therapy is really beneficial. I know it can get a bad rap, but it really is. The purpose of it is to work on empowering yourself to be fully yourself and whole in all the ways. So I hope as sex positive therapy continues to be encouraged in all realms of therapy, that will be something that people recognize they can come to us and talk to us about.
You mentioned a couple of things early in your conversation, and that I like to call peptide neurotransmitters, where your body feels when you're in trauma, it goes into the muscles of your cells, and these muscles of the cells recognize that trauma, and so sometimes they sit dormant. I remember reading Dr. Joel Pookrum talked about when young girls are sexually traumatized, their body grows a little differently, meaning that their legs kind of grow into a knee knot position, trying to protect the wound, like the body just does its own thing, trying to protect the wound, right? And so she said, if you look at women who have this knee knot body shape, where the outer legs, where the legs fold inward, that's the form of the body trying to protect the wound. Now, what you mentioned is interesting, because when you talk about somebody who's sexually abused and they go through life, whether they went to seek therapy or not, they walk around with these triggers. And so then sometimes I've heard women who came from abusive father end up having abusive men, because somehow they feel like that if he hits me, he must love me. So now, in a sense, this somehow drawn into that which we're vibrating out, which means that the universe is only giving us a vibrational match to who we are. So therefore, if a person who has sexual trauma, that means that the person that she goes to date, he also or she also going to need to get therapy to deal with the person who has a trauma relationship. Other than that, they're going to continue to push each other's triggers. Is that right? I mean, in a sense, when you're making a statement that the person needs to understand, then that person who needs to understand needs to go through therapy so they can understand what they're dealing with in a relationship. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think couples therapy is warranted. I think a lot of people want to do some of their individual work and work through some of those trauma triggers before they can really talk about it without anxiety or panic setting in. So it's great to do both and, right? To have some individual trauma work around specifically the issues that are going on with you, the body responses. We're not connected well often, mind and body, emotion and rational, and feeling and being, right? So there can be often a somatic response, a body response to sex, to touch, to that kind of intimate connection with someone else, based on the body remembering, like you said, based on that sort of internalized awareness that even if we're not conscious of, the body, as I said before, keeps score. And that's actually a really important book. If anyone feels like they want to do some work, there is a book called The Body Keeps Score that can be really helpful to kind of understanding, connecting body and mind. But to answer your question about father issues, daddy issues, as people call it, it's less about someone expecting to be loved in an abusive way. It's more subconscious, like, I don't have a model. I'm looking for paternal love. I'm looking for that male, because they were abused maybe by a father or an uncle or an authority figure in their life, or a grandfather, or whatever it might be, or a cousin, a minister, a person close to their family. It's pretty common for sexual abuse and trauma to happen within the system of the community and the family, which is really, really difficult, and creates even more shame and toxicity, as you can imagine. But it's not so much that someone's seeking consciously to be in pain or to be continued to have someone hurt them, and it's that they don't understand, or maybe can't make sense of, this person said they loved me, and yet they touched me this way, or they hurt me this way, or they yelled at me, or they hit me. I'm now confused about what is appropriate, healthy. That was my reality. Some people don't realize for decades that what happened to them is not what happens in other homes.
You know, it's interesting as we speak about this, because I'm kind of blown away myself, because I'm sitting back thinking about dating throughout the years, and a lot of what I'm hearing is kind of verifying some things that I thought about as I've dated throughout the years. You know, myself in general, I'm a pretty confident individual. You know, I believe in me first and foremost before anybody else does. So I walk into spaces with that level of confidence. Therefore, you know, now I'm sitting here thinking about maybe that level of dominance that gets displayed, if you will, or that level of confidence that gets displayed, that potentially attracts certain type of women. And you know, in my times of dating, I can count more when it comes to women who had been sexually traumatized at younger ages. And what I've seen a lot of is that at younger ages, they go to speak up about it to their family, and the people don't believe them. And I've seen situations where there was triggers, you know, and you find out after the fact, as you sit down and talk, and realize, oh, this person was raped when they were younger. So, you know, the sex was a trigger.
You mean as a partner, you find that out?
Say it again. Yeah, with a partner, and find out after the fact that the reason why they're still moving and shaking after sex is because of a rape that they experienced, and this sex was a trigger. You know, so it's interesting as we speak about this, because one thing you said, not connected well, mind, body, and soul. And the first thing that pops in my mind or pops in my head is health and wellness, our diet. When you say not connected well, mind, body, and soul, because I
Mm-hmm.
believe personally that the food that we eat, the lack of uh, oxygen influenced foods that we eat is contributing to more coagulated blood, which does not allow as much oxygen to get to the brain, for instance. And ultimately, it is altering the way people think. So now you start talking about synthetic chemicals and ingredients going into the body and mind. And we all have different DNA, so you don't know how that's going to affect different people in the way that they think. So I feel like, even our diet is something that contributes contributes to that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something amazing when you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, just the way we carry ourselves, we treat ourselves, it has so much to do with our connection to our bodies, and a lot of folks that have been abused, sexually particularly, tend to not want to be in their bodies. They may feel that their bodies have betrayed them, that they had a response, an arousal response to something that was happening to them. And that doesn't mean that they enjoyed it. It just means that our body is created to have a response physiologically to a certain kind of stimulation, but they don't know that, or they're confused about that, or they haven't had anybody normalize that for them. And so then they can kind of feel like their body betrays them. Or, I don't know about the Nina kind of development. Haven't really heard that before but yes, the body is going to respond. Even I've seen women, obviously, as a therapist, not as a doctor, but whose OBGYNs, when we check on things, because I always like to check on organic issues before we assume that it's anxiety that's causing some triggers. We want to make sure that, like, there's pain with sex, that there's also not an organic reason for that, that there's, not a hymen still in place, or a smaller canal, or a tilted uterus, or something like that for women who tend to be the ones with pain. But there can be an introital bump, so like at the entrance, where if you were having penetrative sex, that would be the entrance to your canal, vaginal canal. That there can be an introital bump that's created by the body trying to say, no, I don't want this. And people aren't even aware of that. Or there can be incredible tension within the muscles in the pelvic bowl, because we have the same amount of muscles in our pelvic bowl that we do in our neck. And when you sleep wrong, you crank your neck, you twist around, you tend to, like, rub that area pretty quickly, like, oh man, I really slept wrong, and my neck hurts. So imagine all those same amount of muscles are in your pelvic bowl, and you've had trauma that's created all this tension and tightness, and there's not massaging that. There's not an awareness to do that. There's not a lot of people who can help with that. And if you don't really like connecting to your body, you're certainly not going to want to touch it yourself. So you have all this tension, and sometimes even physiological development, like you were saying, that your body responds by doing something about it. And that's going to create difficulties ever feeling or often feeling any kind of pleasure, because you're not only stressed in your mind and can't relax, but your body is also holding on to all this stress. And yeah, if you're not eating well, if you're not working on your self-esteem, if you're not walking and doing things to kind of get your body to release toxins otherwise, there's a definite cumulative effect to that.
That self-esteem thing is a powerful piece there as a person grows up. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this: what are some of the signs of a child may do, say, or not say and do that could maybe identify that they're being sexually abused?
Mm-hmm. That's a huge spectrum, but I will say a lot of times trying to just normalize that kids at certain ages touch themselves because they find that there's pleasure to it, and it's not sexual at all. Like if a 5, 6-year-old is masturbating a lot, touching their themselves a lot, it doesn't mean that they're doing it for because they're sexual. It's a natural developmental process to explore your body and go, oh, this feels good, and then want to do things that feel good more. But there can also be a more intense acting out when there's kind of compulsive masturbation or touch going on with younger kids who maybe or even are expressing wanting to do things or asking for things or touching themselves or wanting to touch other people in ways that you think, how did they know to ask that? Or there seems to be like some exposure that must have happened for them to be conceptualizing something that's inappropriate for their age, but they're seeking it or asking for it or talking about it, right? A lot of times kids work out trauma through play. So you might see more sexualized behavior in the way that they are role-playing dolls or, more aggression and smashing things that are body related or drawing. There's a lot of expressive therapies that work around, responses through art because kids don't have the verbal skills to say this happened or I don't like this or this hurts or this is confusing. They don't have the language. So they work through it through play, through touch, through kind of more adultified behavior. They can also become more anxious, not want to be around certain people, freak out or cry or panic if you're going to somebody's house. And it's like, what you've always gone to, the first, like, our neighbor's house. We spend time with them all the time, but later may find out that the older brother in that house, when the parents were hanging out, making dinner, and the kids were playing, he was playing inappropriately. And so there's a response to not wanting to go to that person or to that function or to that place. Even school, sometimes there can be just an anxiety of just like anyone who is authoritative. You might see a little response to that if they've had someone take advantage of them. So, there's a lot of responses. Definitely more irritability, trouble sleeping, nightmares, urinating when they haven't, like bedwetting, things like that for younger kids. The acting out in the more sexualized behavior probably for older kids, and becoming more interested in sex earlier, or finding porn history, that kind of thing for younger kids, that they're seeking out that kind of voyeurism or stimulation. 12-year-old boys are the main targeted population for porn now. 10 to 12-year-old boys.
What do you think of the music and the movies and finding little kids twerking at that age? Do you think somehow we're allowing society to get to these kids, and these kids are doing things that are really just for adults, but adults find it funny and find it really cool to see a little girl twerking? And lastly, I want to definitely ask you, and I want you to answer that one, but I definitely want to ask you about boys being molested and why they grow up as men, they keep it more quiet.
And
about
real quick,
more than the sexual images.
Real quick, guys. I definitely, real quick, we only have about a few minutes left, and this is just such a deep conversation. Michelle, would you be willing to come on video for a few minutes after?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, this is a really important thing, and I know I'm getting long answers because it's a complex, traumatic response kind of thing. But yeah, I would be happy to stay and answer questions or talk more about it.
Absolutely. You've you've got the link there. So folks,
Yeah, I'm on.
if you're on the radio, um, folks, then and Michelle, it would be the most recent link that I sent you last night or this morning, and because there's a different link for each show. So because I don't see you here in the back office at all. But with that being
Yep.
said, I want to make sure that I give a big shout out to our sponsors, healthdaddywow.net. Once again, healthdaddywow.net. Again, folks, that is a place where you can find all type of amazing supplements. I went there recently to grab some tea to help cleanse when it comes to getting rid of mucus in the body, things of that nature, folks. Health Daddy Wow, you can actually find them locally in Louisville, Kentucky, off Ralph Avenue, or just the same, healthdaddywow.net. Once again, check them out. Tell them you heard it right here on the Tipping Point Show. Again, syababa.com. That's SYABABA.com. Folks, that is some of the most, probably the most amazing incense, oils, things of that nature, folks. That is owned by yours truly, Brother John Yah. Again, that's syababa.com, SYABABA.com. They are in over 400 locations in the tri-state area. And last but not least, folks, remember, every life has infinite value. Okay, that's God's Lives Matter.com, folks. Again, God's Lives Matter.com. Every life has infinite value. You can check them out, hit the apparel link, and grab the big purple shirt with the big yellow letters there. That's God's Lives Matter.com. Any last words real quick before we wrap up the radio show, John?
Yeah, for anybody listening, listen, if you know of anyone that, if you know of any child that's been abused, don't keep it under the rug. Don't try to hide it. If the child is expressing in any form of, like she just mentioned, don't want to go over someone's house, begin to talk to that child and find out what's going on. And if anyone does know of any child being abused, you can call the Child Abuse Hotline. You can Google it and find it right here in Louisville, anywhere you are. And trust me, the Child Protection Agency will swoop right in and investigate that. So let's not turn our heads, because it is going on in our families. A lot of families are having it going on, and we need to put this and nip this in the bud as soon as possible, right? Because we don't want another child growing up abused, having sex problems, and then they become predators themselves, so they just shy away from sex altogether. We don't want that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Michelle, any last words real quick?
I will just add to that. If a child comes to you, or even an adolescent or adult, and says, this thing happened to me, no matter when, please support them. It is very difficult to talk about that. Even if it's hard for you to believe or comprehend, first response should always be to any kind of indication of abuse, or someone telling you, I've been hurt in this way. It should be support and empathy and compassion. You will have time to parcel out the how or why.
Is there a number
later,
where people can reach you, Michelle?
Yeah. My website's michellespillwagon.com, and that's probably the best way to reach me. I don't see children anymore, but I do see couples and adults, so they can reach me there.
All right, folks, remember that's michellespillwagon.com. And once again, we will see you next week, same place, same time, right here on the Tipping Point Morning Show. All right, folks, until then.
Peace. Along with Great Lakes Entertainment brings...
All right, give us 1 second, folks. We're going to reboot real quick. All right, brother, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me good?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're gonna have to see if we can get Michelle on. I think she may be clicking an old link. But real quick, here we go, folks.
You are listening to The Tipping Point Show with your host, Mr. Just Ask Joe, John Young. Right here on WLOU. Stream it live on Facebook and WLOUonline.com. And now, The Tipping Point Show.
Sometimes I think I should say The Tipping Point After Show.
Yeah, we might have to do that. Welcome, Miss Michelle, to the Tipping Point After Show. Man, this is really deep conversation, because it makes me think. I know I was sharing with Brother John at one time before, and I said that, to my knowledge, I can only think of a few women who, to my knowledge, that I've dated, haven't been abused. It seems like a grave majority throughout my life have been abused. I can almost write a book on this. And one of the big things that I've seen, and I guess I've seen it go either way. I've seen some women who are very reserved and quiet. And it takes a lot to pull from them. And in my mind, I use the word boring. And it just takes a lot to engage in conversation and things like that. And then I know some, like in a shell, and I know some that were abused and or traumatized, I should say, and they went the total opposite way. Like, I can remember when you started talking about the sexual promiscuity. I remember a young lady when I was younger. She told me how there was something that happened between her and her sister. It wasn't, I don't think anything forced or anything like that, but there was some type of, she was much younger, and we were 13 and 14 at the time. And when she was much younger, there was some type of sexual event with her sister. And, I don't know if that played a part or not, but I do know that she grew up to be very, very sexually promiscuous, exploring women and men all throughout her life. She even when you talked about having certain relationships, she even had a child by a married man who, I believe still kept his marriage intact and the secret of his child away from his marriage, so.
Well, you could write a book.
Oh my God. It's interesting when you start talking about that. I've seen some, like I talked before, where, I remember when I was 17, a young lady, we were making love, and I noticed something wasn't right. I backed off, because she was, she was one who, she was always yelling, hey, more, harder, this, that, and the other. I noticed something wasn't right. I backed off, and she's sitting there shaking in a fetal position ball. And all I could do is sit there, put my hand on her and try to console her. And then later we talked about what that was about, you know, and I'm 17 learning about this stuff. And we talked about it, and she had been raped when she was younger. So apparently, for whatever reason, she calls out for the reenactment of the rape in a sense by yelling out harder and this, that, and the other. I've seen where it turns into anxiety, high anxiety, and stress.
Absolutely.
I've heard where one young lady, she said she only does it or only has sex because the man wants to have sex. But outside of that, it's like she could care less. But in order to try to be normal in her mind, she does that only when she's dating someone and he wants to. It's nothing that she really is trying to do. And it's just interesting how it's played out differently. And man, I wish there was something that people could do.
Well, imagine you've never had a pleasurable experience with sex, or you have pain with sex, and you don't really know that that's atypical. And so every time you have sex, you have a negative response to it, whether it be your brain and your anxiety, or you know, your body, or both, or like, you know, you have that trigger response, like the woman that you were talking about may have wanted that, or may have been saying it because she thought that's what was typical for men to want. You know, we're pretty socialized as women who are in heterosexual relationships, or just influenced by heteronormative culture, to be told that we're of service, you know, to men, especially through the church, and through kind of more foundational evangelical kind of church-based teachings. So that patriarch is in place for sure. And so sometimes women will do the Hollywoodized version that they think they're supposed to, you know, rodeo style and hot and yeehaw and, you know, harder, because they think that's what they're supposed to do because they've not experienced a loving, caring, compassionate relationship. So it could be that there was a reenactment, or it could have been that, you know, that person was seeking what they thought they were supposed to for your pleasure, and then ended up getting triggered by it. But, you know, there was a lot of different, you know, circumstances that you were talking about, and that just goes to show how complex this PTSD is. There's so many different responses to it. And I
don't even think people associate PTSD as a term to associate with sexual trauma.
I mean, that's what we're talking about. All of these responses are post-traumatic stress responses. And so, you know, you may see people that are also misidentified as, I mean, there's usually an anxiety, a generalized anxiety that goes with it, but misidentified as like depressed or even ADHD because they have unresolved trauma and they're trying to work it out. Like a kid might be like really hyper at school and not able to sit down, and it might be more of a sign of anxiety and you know, a relationship to a traumatic experience than really the ADHD. But you know, we're quick to label things, and we're quick to want to medicate things and make it better very quickly. So you have to be careful to advocate for yourself from that health perspective too, but also recognize that, like, if a kid is having a response like that, to check it out a little bit more thoroughly. And I wanted to respond to what you were saying earlier too. When you say promiscuous, what do you mean? Because that's kind of a broad term, and I think also kind of can be judgmental. Not isn't on you.
And you know, you're right. And I thought about that after I said it. But you know, sexual promiscuity. I guess growing up, hearing that term, you know, it was someone who was really doing a lot of exploring, you know, almost to an abnormal sense. So when I think about that young lady, I think about her sneaking, even after we dated at, puppy love age, 13, 14, 15, and still being friends, I think about her sneaking, a guy into her home at night while her parents were sleeping, to get that fix. I think about, and associating it with sexual promiscuity, I think about, her diving and exploring women, and men, and then claiming to be lesbian, yet having a child later with a man, and just really just kind of seemingly not satisfied sexually, to the point to where she keeps exploring, and you see the variety of relationships that she has throughout her life.
It's not uncommon for folks that are in same-sex relationships to explore, because they're trying to make sure that if they're going to claim something that's quote unquote not the norm, because we are in a heteronormative society, they may try everything out and realize, that's not really for me. Also, there are folks that really just like to have a variety of lovers. And there are folks that really like sex, but it's not a compulsive, addictive, negative. I think sneaking poison in the house when your parents were sleeping was pretty typical for a lot of girls I knew. But or guys, really, like it's that like little bit of rebelliousness and that seeking, that it's exciting, it's novel, right? We're just exploring those kinds of things. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily that it's serving a hunger or a purpose or an addiction as much as it's like exploring. And honestly, I think, if that's if you are a highly sexualized person and it's healthy and you can have intimate experiences, but also just can like the physical connection with somebody, and can do that without needing to bond with them, but it's pleasurable and consensual for you, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think we have to be careful not to call people out for having a higher level of drive and desire than what other women might, or even men.
Exactly, and I'm glad that you said that, or even men, because I will say that I have a very high sex drive, but my being turned on has a lot to do with the woman I'm with, and just the desire is created and nurtured and cultivated by her and who she is, and all of what we do for each other. Those are the things that kind of turn me on, and such like that. So I feel like, even
You're
if
a lover,
I've been
not a
told,
fighter.
yeah, exactly. I can fight though. The martial arts and wrestling classes is no joke. But with that in mind, yeah, I've always, I think, been that way, and I've found myself in those situations, and had to be understanding, because that's what I knew and understood, that I needed to be in those moments. But yet and still, it didn't change my sex drive at all, and I don't think it's unhealthy, because it's cultivated by who I'm with in our relationship versus.
Well, that may also be why you've had a lot of women attracted to you, to your confidence, to the things that you were discussing earlier, to that sort of assertiveness that you show, that powerfulness that you just carry, because you may also come across as very compassionate and very caring and nurturing. And so that's a lot what people are seeking when they're trying to have a healthy attachment. So you may have dated a lot of women who'd been in abusive relationships or who'd been sexually abused early on in life because they see you as a safe haven. And I think that's something to be really, aware of. And it's a gift for those who have been with you to know that you are aware enough to stop and check on somebody, put your hand on them and just let them be where they are, or, recognize that. And that's the way we can partner well in general, is making sure that it's always consensual and always pleasurable when we're having intimate or sexual relations with somebody, that if something's going on and you stop and you kind of check in, or you just stop and you let them be where they are. But I think wanting to make love, there's nothing wrong with a good, I don't know if I can say this word. There's nothing wrong with a good, like, hey, but
well, you can be as forward as you want now,
okay,
here
okay.
on the after show, just so you know.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with good fuck. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. There's not at all. But there's also, if somebody's seeking a more intimate emotional connection because they really desire that, whether they've been abused or not, you may attract that kind of, person, and they may be attracted to just that aura that you give off of, like, kindness and awareness.
Let me ask you about the question we was talking about earlier about music and what the music play in the sexualized music in movies and young girls twerking. What do you say about us not being responsible enough to turn that mess off and not allow our children to watch?
I mean, I think the violence is probably what we are exposing our kids to the most, including on television and in music. More maybe cussing and sexualized metaphors or words. Certainly dancing can be pretty sexual, but yeah, I think we have to be cautious of what we're exposing our kids to. But I think violence in general is also part of the abuse process. It is violent at its core. And so any kind of violence that we're showing where people just don't care about each other, they're after each other, whether that's TV or video games or whatever, they're hurting one another. They can crash a car and just get another one immediately. They can blow somebody up and just immediately get another life, that kind of thing. I think that has a huge effect on especially men in the way that they experience, how to connect or kind of what their norm is. And I mean, yeah, we need to be careful about explicit lyrics and things like that for kids. I think they're going to dance the way that they see dancing in their family and their culture. So it could just be like, fun, and it doesn't have to mean it's sexualized, but we do sexualize women in this culture very early. You can almost, I've had some folks that are more compulsive sexually acting out persons who are really trying to limit their exposure to pornography or that kind of thing because it's become compulsive for them. And it's hard to even watch TV, they say, because, there's a Big Mac commercial or a Burger King commercial, and this woman is like in a bikini eating a burger that's like dripping down her chin. I mean, even that is sexual.
Exactly.
So I think as a culture, we need to back off the way that we're objectifying persons, be they male or female, because, I think that's really the key component, and the violence, the exposure to that has probably more to do, is going to have an effect.
In your sessions, do you find more women admitting to being abused than men? Does men seem to not open up and let that be known?
Absolutely.
That they're abused?
Absolutely. I mean, I have both. I treat both. And so I definitely see men that have been sexually abused. It is deeply shameful for both men and women. But for men, there is this internalized fear that they will not be seen as manly if it's known, especially if it was a same-sex person who objectified and harmed them and abused them. Because then they're worried they're going to be seen as gay. I think we kind of talked about that earlier. They're worried that they're going to, not be seen as masculine. They're maybe they're even worried they are going to become gay because there is that kind of leap, for some folks. There's an assumption that if you've ever, felt a certain way or had an experience with another male, that automatically, that would make you so. And at a young age, it would be hard to disclose that. Or, it's a person that's really close in the family and esteemed, and no one is going to believe them, or it's going to be hard to talk about. Or it would, maybe that's the only male they have a relationship with. And so it could cut that off,
Right. But a male who keeps it in, bottles up, there's an issue that can actually pop and make him become a sexual predator himself, hiding it, because that's an issue. It got to be a mental issue, hiding the pain that you're keeping to yourself. How does that end up? How could that end up playing out into his life as an adult?
I would say.
Now, my first thought, and let me just say real quick, and maybe this will trigger a little more a thought from you, Michelle. But my first thought when you say that, John, is the perpetuation of abuse, as to how that plays out in their life. Because now you start talking about internalized sexual or internalized emasculation, right? So now anyone who shows any display of dominance over them in their speaking to them or talking to them could trigger that person to react in a very high or intense manner.
Like that toxic masculinity kind of thing where they're more aggressive to kind of overcompensate for that fear. Is that what you mean?
Exactly, like short man's complex in a big truck, right? So yeah, that's my first thought. What's your thoughts, Michelle?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of men that have a lot of shame or a toxic response, it is toxic to keep secrets. I find that they're less, unless it's very acute abuse, or and that might even mean a long time, or that they were isolated with just the abuser, that kind of thing. It's unlikely they're going to become more sociopathic or become necessarily predatorial unless it's that intense. Most of the men I have worked with that have had some abuse in their background are actually more aware, more gentle, even maybe apprehensive sexually, or even may have erectile dysfunction or some other things that happen because of their own anxiety. So I would say it probably swings the other way, that there might be more overcompensation behaviors for some, and they might be more aggressive in bed. But just like, women's responses to maybe being more sexual and hypersexual versus like maybe being averse to sex and not wanting to ever have sex or feeling like they're just doing it out of obligation, like you were talking about earlier. Men can have, that either or experience too, that maybe they're more aggressive and hypersexual because they're trying to like peacock it and show their feathers and make sure that everybody knows they're a man. Or it could be that they're, a lot more sensitive, a lot more self-aware during sex, a lot more nervous about whether or not they can perform, and that can create some other issues.
Let me ask you this. When it comes to a child, and this is very interesting because this is what I do with my grandbaby, but I'm going to ask you a question here. What's the best way to ask the child whether they're being abused or not? Here's what I do. It's very tricky. I ask several questions to my grandbaby. Whenever she comes from school, we homeschool her, but we send her to a private homeschooling. And so I've always asked her a question when she comes home. How was your day? Number one. I would say, did you read today? She'll say yes or no. Did you write? Did you draw? What did you eat? I would ask, Did you cry today? Did you feel sad today in school? Did anybody touch you? Anybody yell at you? And I would ask these questions instead of just asking one. I would ask a series of questions to see how she would answer. Now, how would you say you can ask a child to get them to talk about something they may be ashamed to talk about, or may be scared to talk about because they may not want to get that person in trouble? How do you get that information out of that child?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's really important for parents to be proactive. So, like, teaching kids that they have personal bubble, you know, that this is my personal bubble and no one is allowed in the space. Like, if you reach your hands out, people may not be able to see what I'm doing, but like in front of you. So there's kind of a space. This is my personal bubble here, before, you know, in front and behind. You can't come into my bubble unless I invite you. If you come in uninvited, you know, I can say stop. I can set a boundary. Boundaries are important to teach, but also that personal space that doctors, you know, might touch there to do an exam or something that, you know, mommies and daddies or the adults who are caretaking might need to help with certain situations, but after a certain age, like, you know, diapers or that kind of thing, but never anything that would make someone feel yucky. You know, you kind of have to use their languaging apparent to their development. So, you know, you teach them who can and can't touch and why they would touch, and that it's okay to touch yourself, you know, as they get older and maybe are exploring their bodies. But that's private too, and we do that, you know, in the bedroom or the bathroom, or, you know, not out in public, that kind of thing, and that there's privacy to doing anything that, well, privacy is necessary to doing anything that is of a more sexual nature. So putting those things in place is really important so that you can, you know, a kid might come to you if they know that and say, you know, somebody got in my space today, somebody got in my bubble and I was really mad about it. And you could say, oh, well, what happened? Like, tell me about that, you know, or, you know, you can say, like, did everybody respect your bubble today? Were you in a good place? You know, did you feel like you were able to, and they might say, I had some kid, and it might not be sexual at all, but like, I had some kid come in and they were just like a close talker, you know, they get nerves. And you kind of have to like say like, ooh, step out, please. This is my personal space. If you haven't taught a kid that, I think the best way to ask them is just, you know, kind of, you know, how they're feeling and how they're doing in their body. And, you know, if anyone has ever touched them in a way that they didn't like or they didn't feel was okay, you know, and it would be okay, they're not going to get in trouble. You kind of have to normalize and assure them they're not going to get in trouble if it's somebody close to you, or, you know, that it's not good to keep secrets because it makes you sick in your tummy and inside. So anytime they ever feel like they need to tell you something, they can, kind of laying the groundwork for like maybe needing to ask that. I would be cautious about asking it too often because you don't want it to become like something that they just kind of check off a list and they're not really thinking about, you know, but you can certainly ask them, you know, has anyone, if you see a behavior, especially, has anyone ever touched you inappropriately? Has anyone ever touched your genitals or your private parts without permission? Has anyone ever asked you to touch their privates, you know, without permit, and you didn't like it? Has there ever been any kind of touch that you didn't like that's happened within your body or within your bubble? You know, and you're not going to get in trouble for this. I just, like, if you have a kid who has like a yeast infection or UTI at a very young age, and it's not typical for them, that's also kind of a big red flag. And so those might be kids that are acting out a lot or playing out a lot, or you're seeing things in pictures that are kind of a red flag for you. Those would be kids to kind of be sure to check in with and ask. And then the prevention part is being proactive ahead of time when they're younger, and they can start at like 2, you know, 3. As soon as they're verbal, they understand personal space, they understand personal bubble, And that's just really empowering, just because also it means like other non-abusive things, they can set a boundary for. Boundaries are not something that we teach our kids very often, but it's a really important. I always say boundaries are like, fences. They're there and they have a gate that swings open and closed, so you can let people in and keep people out, but they always keep people from shitting in your yard.
Yeah.
Hey, I see a book that maybe you guys can collaborate on called How to Talk to Your Children. Because, I think in today's society, part of the reason why some of this conversation isn't had is because people have normalized kids coming home from school and giving these one-word responses. How was your day? Good. People have normalized that. So a lot of people don't know how to talk to their kids and how to create conversation with their kids. And they just chalk it up, especially as they get older in teenage years and stuff. They just chalk it up as, they're teenagers,
Yeah.
And that's the way it should be.
Open-ended questions are highly effective. So like, instead of how was your day, hey, so what happened today? What happened that was interesting? What happened that was weird? What did anything happen of note? What was the best thing that happened to you today? Or that kind of thing. Maybe not a yes or no response, but like, we want how was your day to be an open response, but usually it's good, bad, whatever. I don't know. It was fine, whatever. But if you're asking like a more open-ended question, like, so what went on today for you? Like, what's happening with your friend group, or, anything new coming around, that kind of thing. You may get a longer response. There's some books about like how to talk to kids, especially in adolescence. And if you're like picking them up at carpool or picking them up from the bus, one thing they say is that boys tend to need to kind of relax or have a decompression between school and kind of going into their home life. And so if you're picking them up, just turn the music up and hang out and just be like, hey buddy, glad to see you, or whatever. And before you ask them anything, so that they can kind of switch gears. And that might be true for women too, or for girls too. But there are some good developmental books just about, talking to teens and that kind of thing. And I think giving them a little space before we're right in their face and asking them all, like, that might also be part of why we get short answers, is they just got out of school and they're like, I don't know, it was whatever. It was just today.
And that's interesting that you say that, because for the most part, most of us adults need a little time to decompress after our long day at work or what have you. And we may not think about giving that to the children as well. And I know I can admit that I'm guilty of that, because usually if I pick up the kids or what have you, I'm asking questions right then and there, and maybe giving them some time to decompress or what have you is a better way to get to a better conversation with them later. So I'm glad that you spoke about that. One of the things I wanted to ask about was religion. Okay, and how religion kind of plays a part. One thing that I'm seeing right now, okay, follow me here. You look at, let's say, the Catholic Church, right? And the Catholic Church has been, the finger's been pointed a lot with Catholic priests, and
more than finger point. I mean, they've been indicted.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So let's go there. They've been indicted.
Not
yeah.
Not yeah, but.
Exactly. So, but they've been in the news for like ever, right? When it comes to Catholic priests and little boys, and the first thing I think about is, okay, maybe men traditionally have higher sex drives than women, and that's kind of maybe a natural thing, and something you see in nature in general. and then they've got nothing but boys around them, and so all of a sudden that high sex drive gets transposed into that or whatever, right? Or some would sit back and then talk the conspiracy theory of the Catholic Church and little boys and what's the word? It was right on the tip of my head. But there's a whole movement right now. I've seen TED Talks. Couldn't watch the whole thing, but I've seen TED Talks where they are trying to normalize the relationship between adult and child. I'm sorry, what is the word? You guys know it. When adults abuse, good Lord, what is the word?
Pedophilia.
Pedophilia. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
So they're trying to normalize pedophilia, right? So there's TED Talks out there. There's conversations out there saying that it's okay to love who you want to love. And I know you said something earlier. You said when someone loves you in a way that's inappropriate. So I'm trying to think, can we call inappropriate sexual trauma love from any point of view there, from the abuser to the exact? So how is religion playing a part in this?
So many things. First of all, I don't think a child ever asks to be harmed. I don't think a child ever puts themselves in a position, even if they have a high sex drive, if an adult takes advantage of them, if an older person takes advantage of them, that is not something they asked for, ever. Even I don't care how high their sex drive is. They're not seeking that from a person that is, a priest, or, they may see them as an authority. And that's the thing. Like, if you have power and authority, you can abuse that and take advantage of that relationship that you have that's trusting, and that relationship that you have as authority, that you see your parents or your adults, really respecting this person, and then you have this crazy experience with them that doesn't feel right, and you're not sure what to name it, or that it's not okay, and that you've been abused, and telling your parents or your adults that happened with this highly respected person, you have to sort of decide what's worth the risk and what's the benefit of that. Is anything actually going to happen, or are they going to? A lot of times the fear is they won't believe me, and so then I'm going to be a liar in their eyes, or they're not gonna trust me. And that's a lot of times why it's kept to themselves, especially for, I think, boys, beyond that sort of internalization that we were talking about earlier. And I think the church plays a part in it by creating so many negative connotations around sex, that the idea that you have been abused and need to come forward, or would like to come forward with that, but it's a sin and you're going to go to hell for having had that experience, terrifies children, terrifies adolescents, terrifies even adults to come forward, because they're going to then be, maybe judged, or they're going to have to admit to something that happened to them that makes them, not pure in the eyes of God, depending on where you're worshiping, what kind of dogma your church is spewing.
Let me say this, and I want to answer some questions that was posted on our Facebook page. First of all, having a sex drive is a mental thing, not a physical thing. It starts in the mind first. The mind controls the penis. When it thinks about sex, when it starts thinking about and understanding sex and thinking about it a lot, it creates the drive. It's not that a person who's just normally healthy end up just having a drive. No, it's a thinking process. And this is why it's very important to understand environment, how environment plays a role. If you're in an environment where there's a lot of sex talk, there's a lot of sex and gyrating and all of that, then it is easy for that person to grow into that area. Now, with that said, there was a couple of questions that was.
I'll go back to them, John.
Okay.
Let's see
Can,
here.
can I
First,
say one thing though, John? Because you pointed
Yes, go
something
ahead.
out as you said that you were talking about your grandbaby.
Yeah.
I want to just say, and Jimmy, you asked too. Like, no, we can't ever call abuse love because that's a predatorial situation. Now, if it's kid to kid, if it's an older kid, that doesn't mean it's not abuse. But if it's like two kids experimenting, that's different. That's different. But in terms of like someone taking advantage of their position of power or their authority or their parents relationship or family relationship to a child, that is not love, and that's what's confusing for kids. And so really being able to explain and having the church explain more, too, about like what is loving behavior, what does that feel like, what does that look like, and anything that doesn't feel like that is something to be questioned and maybe talk to your parent about or talk to your adults about. Those are important lessons to assure kids that if they don't feel if they kind of know what love feels like, that it makes you feel good, that it makes you feel happy, that it makes you feel respected, that kind of thing. We're talking like agape love, love of the neighbor, that kind of thing. But not to the extent that you don't love yourself first, and that's not selfish. That's good. Protecting yourself, loving yourself, taking care of yourself. But also, like, fathers, don't feel afraid to touch your girls. Don't feel afraid to love on them, to hug on them, to give them that strong, connection of affection. As they get older, you're not going to bathe them anymore. After a certain age, you're not going to be the one to kind of help them with, bathroom problems or that kind of thing. Unless you're a single parent, then you might have to.
As a single parent raising a daughter, I had to. And let me ask you this: You brought that up about the relationship. One of the things I know for a fact is that the first love of a child, of a particularly female, should be the father first, and that way she can understand what love is like from the opposite sex. Because a lot of times girls grow up without a father, they go and they seek this attention from boys because they lack the attention they didn't get from their father. Now, with that said, I know that there's statistics out there that says when there's a healthy father in the home, girls are less likely to have babies at an early age. And they show this statistics where young girls who had babies at early age did not have a father in the home. Does that also play a role with young girls who are more protected and not molested at an early age because they have a father? Or is there a statistic showing that young girls who were molested, chances are they did not have a protecting father in the home?
I mean, that's a pretty,
or at least can you speak to your practice and what you've seen?
Right.
Sure. Like I said, I don't see kiddos anymore. But
Right.
I can say, without a strong attachment to either parent, but especially if if maybe there isn't a positive model of a relationship with a male, yes, there might be attention seeking for that. And there may also be a desire to be a parent or to have something to nurture, and being like less cautious. Maybe they haven't really had good sex talk with anybody in their family. That's pretty typical. Most kids learn on the playground. That's the other thing you can do, is make sure you're identifying at age appropriate language, different points of development, that you start talking to kids about touch, about love, about sex, about good feelings in their body, and what's okay and what's not. And you're normalizing some of these things, and then as they get older, you're kind of adding to that and being more structured about how you're explaining things and making sure you're talking to the kids about what's appropriate and not. Even like pornography use and things like that. It doesn't have to necessarily be bad, but are you using it all the time? Or maybe you feel like in your family it's not okay. But if you walk in on a kid and they're using it or they're masturbating and you shame them and you yell at them, you freak out, that's not going to be a positive experience. They're going to carry that with them. And so even just as family, we have to be cautious, whether father or mother, brother or sister or whomever, about like being sex positive in an overall manner. And I don't know about the relation to father being necessarily first. I think typically, girls definitely identify with the mother, and there's a lot of cultural stuff that tells us like we need to be women in a certain way, and so trying to figure out how to connect to that identity, or having very gender typed, stereotyped kind of play, and that kids, boys are only given trucks and girls are only given dolls. I encourage people to, if your kid likes to bake, regardless of what, give them an easy bake oven, with boy or girl. Like, if your kid likes, lots of sports, let them do that, boy or girl. Encourage those things that they're interested in, without gender typing them, because that can certainly create some stigma around the things that we were talking about earlier, like what constitutes maleness and identity as a strong guy versus like femininity and identity as a woman or a nurturing person. And those are just, we all have both energies, right? Male and female, masculine and feminine, and got to find that balance between those. Does that answer your question?
Right. Yeah, it's in a sense, because in this society, in this culture here that we're talking about, I find that younger women who seek older men were lacking father figures in their youth. And so you have a fluctuation of younger women seeking older men, not seeking men their age, but they're seeking older men, in a sense, looking for that missing father figure that they didn't have when they was little.
Can happen,
but let me speak to that real quick, because in a sense, statistically, and I don't know if there's a certain age where this stops and things catch up, but statistically, men are mentally 5 years younger than they biologically are. So women always tend to grow up faster than men. So in a sense, when a woman tends to look to an older man, and in most relationships, the men is older, typically maybe a year or two. But there are a lot of relationships out there where the man is 10 years older, what have you. They look to
old
that.
Enough to be her father.
Yeah. Now that's a whole.
Correct.
I know I can look and see a couple people out there that I know where the man is like 25 years older.
Right.
But at the same time, you're talking people that are well into their 30s that end up in a relationship like that, where the man is, that much older. I know a couple of those. But with that in mind, let's see, I'm not sure what just happened to Michelle. It seemed like she came on twice in the back room there. But with that in mind, looking at some of the questions out here, has anyone on the panel been sexually assaulted by an adult sibling, cousin when they were a child? I know personally that I know of, I have not been. One thing that I always wonder about is how is a person supposed to learn about sex or what have you when they grow up? I know I come from an era where we had sex education in school. We had that class, and we also had soft porn on Cinemax or Skinemax, as we would call it. We had soft porn on Skinemax and Showtime. So me personally, Skinemax, Showtime, and sex ed class in school was where I learned anything about sex. And so, I can remember probably being in elementary school or maybe middle school, and, growing up in the hood, me and one of my boys, we found in the sewer, like if you look down in the sewer on the side of the street, there's a cement step there inside, and walking by, plain as day, there was some dirty magazines there, and we pulled them out and saw all type of stuff in those magazines, right? So I'm assuming that contributed just as well. Never was into any serious hard porn or nothing growing up, but definitely we would sneak to try and hit that late night Skinemax and Showtime. growing up. But
yeah, they had the soft porn kind of shows. Like I remember.
yeah,
They had
yeah,
the
it
soft
wasn't
porn kind of like.
yeah, it was like love
Like,
and yeah, you know, a little music, some loves, and it wasn't this hard, harsh stuff that's out there now. It was much softer and seemingly more normalized in the bedroom. But the question here, Michelle, was: has anyone on the panel been sexually assaulted by an adult, sibling, cousin when they were a child?
I mean, I think that's a pretty personal question. I think if somebody's comfortable talking about that, that's fine. But I'm not sure what the need to know that is. But I can say, just having worked with a lot of people, that have that experience, you can't help but get to a place where you can empathize and understand compassionately what their experience has been. And so whether you've experienced it or not doesn't mean you can't be there to support someone who has. I would just say that. Yeah. But yeah.
Well, I personally have not. I grew up in the 60s, so I grew up in a time where there was this sex hype that's not going on as we see today. There was a lot of movement going on when I was coming up in the 60s, and I had a father and a mother, and I saw their reaction of how they reacted. My first playing house was with a next door neighbor, and she was my age, and I remember us taking a cardboard box, and I wrote about that story, taking a cardboard box that was made to hold a refrigerator. So we took this cardboard box and we cut out a door and a window. We made a house out of it, right? And we were meeting there just to kiss, And what we were doing was just mimicking what our mother and father. She had a mother and father. I had a mother and father, and we was just having fun. And this is how I got introduced, by watching how my father treated my mother, how my mother responded to my father. I didn't grow up in an abusive relationship.
Absolutely.
I didn't grow up in an abusive family, sexually or abusive whoopings or none of that. I think I only had 2 whoopings in my life, and I both deserved both of them. Never saw my sister brothers ever get in any trouble because they never got whoopings because they never got in trouble. But no, I've never been nowhere sexually abused or touched inappropriately as a child. I grew up healthy, I can say, for myself. And I specifically raised my daughter that way. To one of the biggest things, let's talk about this. And when I grew up, I didn't know about pedophilia. I didn't think it was a black thing when I heard about it, right? I always thought it was white people stuff. That's nice stuff, right? Because it didn't grow up. But then after I had my daughter and I started reading books, I read a book called by John Amos, Psychological Development of Black Children. And so I read that book, and I remember as raising her, I raised my daughter since she was 3, and I remember specifically making sure that wouldn't nobody touch her, right? And I heard information from my other side of the family. Don't want to get into that, but I knew of some stuff going on, and I protected my daughter even more by keeping her away from certain people. But no, I haven't. To the question,
that's our job.
Yes, that's our job. Right?
Now here's another question here. It says, why do some people?
I think I interrupted.
Okay.
John,
no, you're fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Why do some people cry during an orgasm? It's another question.
I mean, for all sorts of reasons. Hopefully, it's because you got taken to an enlightened place. Hopefully that's why you had an optimal experience, and so you just weeping. Hopefully that's why, but also, it's a release, and so there can be, a reaction to just having that sort of release physically, and that spiritual connection with a lover that you're very intimate and close to, especially a partner that you are with, in a committed relationship. There can be that kind of, just it's so unique. You're intertwining bodies. It's the closest you can possibly be to another person. You're with each other in your space. You're developing cues. You're reading each other instinctively. This is a normal, natural drive. One of our 3 basic drives, and yet there's something that you're offering to one another. It's a gift, to be in that kind of situation where you can be with somebody else that that you're communing with in a way that you don't with anyone else. You know, it's a very unique kind of way to be with someone. So that can cause it. I mean, there can be people that cry because they didn't like it or they're upset. Maybe they didn't get there and he's done. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, I hear that mostly contributed to women in a male-female intimate situation. Personally, I hear that contributed more to women as crying, and I think that most people would know that if it was a negative cry, you would probably see, feel, hear, and understand that. But I do understand the idea of just someone crying in the midst of making love, and it being a good feeling. And I know that I've wondered why and have asked, and the answer was, I don't know. Just, you know, I don't know. It just, you know, okay. So then the question, you know,
but they're not having a negative response.
No, they're not negative. It's not, it wasn't a problem. There wasn't any pain or anything like that. They just did. And they don't know. So it's just I guess, like you said, an enlightened, heightened place that they were essentially taken to. So that's an interesting
response, a
thought
physiological response. It's a release response. You know, that's all very normal. And what's great though is what you're pointing out is I checked in. Hey, what's going on? You're crying. Are you okay? You know, you don't want to ignore signs like that. You know, and yeah, you want to be compassionate to your partner's experience too, while also being able to be in your own body. I think that's what's tricky about sex. But it's a good model for how we should be in a relationship too. Like, you got to be yourself and fully present and rooted in yourself, and yet still in relationship with somebody else. Even though you're an autonomous self, you still have room to be in a relationship with someone else. Similar with sex, you want to be able to experience your own pleasure, but then you're paying attention to your partner's cues, but not to the point that you're overly invested in them and not experiencing what's going on with you, or that you're only experiencing what's going on with you and you're not paying any attention to them. It's the same with, it's a good sort of metaphor for like the dynamic in relationships we want as well differentiated folks, is, you know, to be together and yet autonomous, to be in a relationship and yet not, you know, get lost in that and over identify with something that other people need, a partner needs, that kind of thing.
Yes, because the signal of crying, an effective crying could signal pain to the other partner, and it could actually turn them off opposed to turning them on.
Sure. Yeah. And I want to say something to what you said earlier, John, too, or
Joe.
I think it was Joe. I couldn't remember who said, but about parents being the model, that you were mimicking some things that you as a parent were really cautious about, you know, kind of the response that you made sure that your child was aware, was appropriate, you know, that they were safe and protected, and also that having grown up in a family that was connected and committed and in the same home, how lucky you were to have that. It doesn't mean somebody who doesn't have that is unhealthy, but Correct. You know, how lucky you were to have that, right? And so being able to see a really loving model and relationship between your parents gave you permission to kind of have and explore and want that in an appropriate way. And that's what I was talking about, I think, during the show, was when we don't have that attachment, when we don't have a model of appropriate, good, healthy relationship, you know, that can create more of the issues around who we choose to partner with, and if those choices help us or hurt us further, if they help us grow, or if they keep sort of feeding that monster, like I talked about. Because if we don't have those models, we see seek them in other relationships. We seek them from other authority figures. We seek them in other ways to try to find mentors or people that we can put in that place. If you don't have that strong pillar of foundation, you're going to seek it somewhere else. And it can often be in relationships and played out that way. So I definitely think, this is probably going to set some people off, but I'm just going to say it anyway. If you're staying in a relationship for the sake of your kids, you're not doing them any favors, because if you have a high conflict relationship, it is just as bad as being in an abusive household. If you're in a high conflict, constantly arguing, the kids are witnessing that, you're not showing loving affection, but you're, proposing that you're, in a loving relationship, that's going to give your kids a model of something where you're unhappy, you're not getting your needs met, and there's a lot of tension and anger and maybe even unhealthy kind of fights and anger and communication. So just remember that your kids mirror you, and so if you need to be in a different relationship to be happy, to be loving, I never encourage divorce, I try not to encourage divorce. There are circumstances where you have to be mindful of the model that you're offering your kids. And so when people say, well, I'm staying until they're 18, I really discourage them from putting those needs ahead of their own, because what ends up occurring is that they create this vacuum where a kid doesn't know what a normal, healthy, or not normal, but what a positive
I can see when
people can look like.
When you're speaking to that, Michelle, I can see the idea of let's say a man being unhappy in a marriage, or the woman being unhappy in a marriage, and they may not realize it, but subconsciously they're being maybe more reserved, more standoffish to their wife or to their spouse, and the kids see that, and then they associate that
aggressive or angry or
absolutely, and they associate that as normalcy. So then now when they go get into a relationship, then that becomes normal to them, and they will accept that in their own relationship.
That's the template.
And it's interesting how that works. People, I don't think people fully realize it, but I mean, I've seen 3 generations down of abuse and the same thing being perpetuated, and people do not fully realize or understand what's really going on, and so that's an interesting thought. Also want to look at next question here. If molested at age 3, can that affect your life even if you don't remember it?
Yes, because remember what we were talking about earlier, the body keeps score. So even if you don't remember the actual events, you may remember the trauma, or you may be afraid to be in the dark, or afraid to sleep alone, or afraid to, go to the bathroom. I don't know. There could be a lot of things that you don't know why, or your parents don't know why, or adults don't know why, but, suddenly you're having all these nightmares, you're afraid to sleep alone, that kind of thing, because something happened to you. You may not, remember it. And then as an adult, if you haven't remembered it, you may not know what the effects of that have been. But if you were to remember it later, if you were having little flashbacks and things and what happened, and you were to remember it later, it can be really devastating for folks to then have to sort of trace back what some of the kind of subtle effects have been that they didn't even realize were connected to anything happening to them. And that can be like a re-traumatization or secondary trauma.
Let me answer that question also about what Lucrease mentioned in that statement. It is, in fact, yes. That just because you don't remember it can still affect you. Here's why. Because 80% of our life is habitual. And most of that 80% is what you gathered in the information between your 3rd trimester and 7 years old, while your mind is in what is called theta wave. While your mind is in theta wave, it is downloaded information. It is like the study where if a woman is pregnant and the child's in the 3rd trimester, that's when the brain begins to download information. Give you an example. Let's say, for instance, the mother's called a bitch. And the first thing the child download is the mother's voice, and then the mother's feelings behind her thoughts. So if the child hears the word bitch also, it doesn't know what the word bitch means, but it's connected to the feeling of the mother because it made the mother feel low, mad, depressed, or sad, right? So now the child comes into this world and it hears the word bitch and it doesn't know why it feels sad, mad, or depressed, because why? It was already uploaded into them before they were 7 years old and they just don't remember. This is why children can learn multiple languages at that age, because their mind is in what is called theta wave, which is also a form of hypnosis. And so, yes, a person can be abused and not remember it, and it will continue to affect their life because they didn't do any shadow work to try to bring it out of the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is the most powerful part of the brain. And again, 80% of your life, 80% of our lives is habit mind, a habit, the habitual life, which means that we do things over and over again. It plays a role in who we bring into our lives, and we wonder why this person is in our life, because somehow you're vibrating it through your own subconscious mind, whether it's an abusive man or whatever, and you continue to go back to that same situation, or you find yourself in that same situation over and over again. You need to address the subconscious mind.
Well, maybe your picker is broken.
Yeah.
and
that might have something to do with it too, or your model.
No, and that explains a lot, John. Absolutely. There's another question here. Why do people tend to believe the molester over the victim? My first thought on that personally is just in a lot of cases we're talking someone older versus someone younger. Therefore, I've seen situation. I know one young lady, it was her mother's, one of her mother's boyfriends that, inappropriately dealt with her. And of course, the mom, knowing that her daughter was a little bit sassy or what have you, believed the boyfriend over the mother. And so now when you look at that, then, she grew up to be a very guarded person sexually, to the point to where sex was compartmentalized over here. And she only dealt with that when she felt she had to in a relationship. Right. But that's my thoughts on that right there. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, guys.
Definitely age and authority, as somebody who is in a power structure, who has an authoritative position, even as a parent, or that you have close contact with. It's hard to talk about someone betraying you like that. And the molester, or the person who's an abusive predator usually has a really good rationale, and the child isn't going to have that kind of languaging or be able to verify. That's why it's so important that we validate anyone who comes forward and says that they've been harmed. Just you believe them first, and then you figure it out later. And if there's, you don't take into consideration personality or somebody being sassy or somebody because then you're kind of saying, well, maybe you asked for it. We don't ever, ever, ever want to send a message, maybe you asked for it, because I don't care how short your skirt was. I don't care how, assertive you are as a male. I don't care, how about those things. You never deserve to be hurt and to be abused, whether it's physically, emotionally, sexually. We don't ask for those things, no matter what our personality. And I would also say, often believed, because there is a threat, like we were talking about with the mom whose boyfriend, there's a threat to not having that relationship anymore with somebody who's been alleged that an allegation's made against, because maybe they're close to you, maybe they're a family person. Maybe it would be really terrifying for you as a parent or an adult to go forward and say, I'm going to make this allegation against you, because the whole community might be affected, or you might be affected within the way that the community looks at you. And so, there's ego involved in it too, and need involved in it too. Maybe that boyfriend was the primary financial income, and so it's too terrifying so there can be like a denial. And I think also it's terrifying to think your child has been through something And so often there's a denial or like a want to distrust that information because of our stuff, because we don't want to believe that we've allowed that sort of thing to happen to our kids, because then we have to deal with that too.
Or deal with the what you allowed, or not what you allowed,
Yes.
but deal with what happened to you when you were younger as well. That parent, in a sense, perpetuating and seeing the same situation perpetuated into their child, seeing that same negative situation perpetuating to that child, not wanting to have to deal with that or revisit that situation that they to themselves had to deal with when they were younger. So
Well, when I was
definitely.
saying aloud, yeah, when I was saying aloud, I meant like a parent, not that they permissed it or condoned it, but that there was somebody that they trusted and left the kid alone with, that they maybe then have guilt about doing that. So when I talk about, like, when I was talking a minute ago about aloud, I don't mean the person that was harmed allowing it. I meant the person that was sort of in charge might have guilt about that, and so they want to deny that it ever happened. But yeah, there is also a legacy of that gets passed down intergenerationally about how we think about it, look at, and understand abuse in the culture of our family too, and I think that's what
So
John was talking about earlier.
absolutely. So as we have, we're having this talk, what about solutions? As we what about solutions? What can we do? What can a person do when it comes to healing, having a healthy relationship, having healthy, sex in a relationship? What can one do? Because I don't want this to just, be a talk, but something that we can learn how we can move forward from. One thing I noticed that in the Black community, in the melanated community, there is more of a push to get into therapy, right? It has been made a little more normalized in our community to get into therapy, and therapy is now therapy is a thing now, right? And unfortunately, in our country, in this country, we are fad driven. So we will take anything and make it a fad, and now it's cool to have a therapist. Most successful people that I know, that I'm familiar with, that are friends of mine, they have therapists or have had therapists, for whatever reason.
Really, you don't have to be broken or sick or mentally ill to be in therapy. It is self-work. Now, that can be privilege. You may not be able to afford a therapist just to do, a kind of self-empowerment or self-awareness work. So, I'm aware of that. But there are a lot of folks that do take insurances, and that's why we have insurance, right? So that we can take care of ourselves. And part of your health is your mental health. And that's connected a lot more than we give credit to the body, whether it's anxiety, depression, PTSD, panic, whatever it might be, eating disordered behavior, that kind of thing. Like those things that are intense and are things that most people struggle with, need to be normalized, and also kind of, given some tools, to cope with those things. And that's what therapy can do, is it helps you gain tools that you then can use for yourself and in coping. So I definitely encourage that when folks are able to, and recognize that it's not something that's a bad thing. You're not being sent to the principal's office. It's a good thing, because you get to have a sanctuary where you get to talk about whatever you need to without judgment, and with a compassionate person who hopefully has, the skill to encourage and help you figure out and guide you to a way to find healing and wholeness for yourself. That's the purpose of therapy. And sex positive therapy, I think, is something that we need to teach all of our therapists so that there isn't any shaming that accidentally goes on there. And I think in terms of action too, some of the things we talked about earlier, like, comprehensive sex education. I wish that was something that the Board of Education really looked at more carefully for our kids, because we are learning on the playground, or, from magazines found in the street, or, from Skinamax, that kind of thing. Our kids learn those things unless we really talk to them about it. And it doesn't have to be, something that a system like a school does, but it would be helpful if there was some, normalization and some education earlier for our kids. So also make sure you talk to your kids and the kids in your community appropriately, in an appropriate setting.
That brings me to a point. Statistically, from my understanding and what I've looked up, I think like in the UK, they have a lower number of sex crimes than we do here in the US. But when you look at, over there, television, advertising, everything is much more kind of open. Like you see the body more often than not. You see nakedness more often than not. So does the fact that we kind of nun vision everything when it comes to sex, or with things being covered up so much, does that contribute to a little kid growing up wondering what's under that dress or what have you, and then being educated properly throughout school? So,
Sure, absolutely. I think all of those things. There are families that walk around naked and are comfortable with that, and so the kids kind of grow up being comfortable with their bodies, comfortable seeing things, to an appropriate degree. There are certain ages where you need to cover up in front of them and that kind of thing, but just opening and leaving the door open while you go to the bathroom, there are families that do that more comfortably, and then there are families that are far more private about it. That's a choice. That's not a good or bad either way, but it maybe can have effect on just how somebody kind of sees, privacy, and maybe as a also like a place that they need to be because there's some shame or something bad about seeing naked bodies or something like that. So yes, I think that can be the case. We also, as a culture in America, objectify the body as opposed to celebrating it. And I don't know European commercial stuff. But if it's more like normalizing and all types of body shapes and stuff, that's a beautiful thing, because we're celebrating that we have this, made in the image of God kind of thing that we're taking care of, right? And also, I think the churches need to be part of the education piece too. Stop shaming people for being sexual. If we are made in the image of God, then I have a clitoris for a reason, and you have pleasure and are able to feel pleasure for a reason in your body. And so you also have to kind of, be mindful that it's not just the body as the temple kind of feeling about just, health, but it's also like recognize that you're a sexually embodied person, and it's okay to do that. But the church has to take the shame factor away from that. Shame is the biggest issue here, I think, across the board, whether it's family, what happened to you, tragedy or trauma in the background, or just kind of the normalization that it's not okay and that your life is going to be over if you, get someone pregnant or get pregnant. Now that might, that's an important thing to be cautious about. But most men that I talk to are like, I was terrified to have sex, and now I have anxiety about sex because I'm so afraid I was going to get someone pregnant. So instead of making it terrifying, why not talk about, so these are the ways you protect yourself, just like the personal bubble. These are the ways that you take care of yourself, and you take care of the person that you're with to make sure that you don't get in a situation you don't want. You have to think about that. There are consequences, etc. And empowering girls to also participate in that and to understand. But that all takes, education, and I think across the community, that we're watching out for each other, for each other's kids, that we're watching out about our communities and how we're messaging things, that we're having conversations with our kids, if you're normalizing and you know, recognizing that, you know, porn is something that may be part of what they're exposed to, you know, I tell kids, my kids, it's sort of like professional wrestling. That is not what it actually looks like. That is totally like, you know, performance. That is not what actual sex looks like. And here's some ethical porn sites if you really want to look and understand what real lovemaking can look like. Not on YouTube and definitely not on Pornhub. So, you know, you can even normalize by giving them the right resources or offering to give them a book like Our Bodies Ourselves for girls. There's a teen version of that, or What the Hell is Happening to My Body, kind of things for as they're growing up through puberty.
Here's one of the things we try to address in our community when it comes to sex. The looseness of it, the thoughtless of it, and not for building family. In other words, we have sex for pastime. We have sex to have fun. It's a wonder why more poor people have more sex than people who are wealthy, have more babies, that is. And so here we're facing a situation where we got more children, absent fathers. We got young girls, not even 19 years old, pushing a baby in the carriage and pregnant with a baby, standing on the bus stop. We are in a situation to where we're having young kids raise kids, and they haven't even established their financial goals yet, right? And so because of this overhyping to have sex, to push this sex. One thing I would say, and to revert to what Joe's talking about, what was going on in UK, it's very interesting. In a lot of cultures in Africa, women walk around with their breasts out and all of that, and children don't grow up being, oh, look at that, there's some tits, there's some ass. We in this society, we look at things differently. And so if you bring somebody in that society over here, and a young man looks at how we look at butts and stuff, they'd be like, that's no big deal. In certain cultures, the neck is attractive. The neck is effective. How many rolls on the neck? A thick woman with rolls on the neck. In certain culture, that's attractive. In another culture, the feet is attractive. The woman's feet is sexually attractive. So we got these different things in different cultures. But her in this culture, and in a sense to where we are pushing these sexual gyrating, you see in all the stores that I deliver my products to, you see sex pills and sex toys. And so we're pushing this sex, and then you have abortion clinics all around in the hood throughout all America, where it seems like to me are pushing the sex. And if you don't want to wear a condom, don't worry about it, because if you get pregnant, you can go over here and take care of the baby. And it seems as though it's this non-responsible. Nobody wants to take accountability for their penis and their vagina and just let anybody in, anybody shoot and leave their stuff in there. When actually sex is a spiritual dance between two people. And what we need to educate everyone that this is a spiritual dance. This is not for any and everyone to enter your body. And it's not any for everyone for you to put your penis in a person's body just to have fun. That this becomes the opportunity to produce another child that you don't even want. So you just having sex for fun. And I think that is one of the main issues we having in our community, while we're seeing so many babies born and men not even wanting to be responsible. They didn't have sex to have no chick. They just had sex to have fun. But no one said, hey, before you do that, put a condom on. No one told the young girl, there's this thing going around. When my daughter was young, there was this thing going around, and I don't know, it may be still going on with young kids. Well, the boy would say, I don't need a condom, I'll pull out. And not knowing that the ejaculation, you are already sending semen. You haven't even come yet. Semen is already seeking out of you, and the girl gets pregnant because he tells the girl, I'm going to pull out. Don't worry about it. I'm going to pull out before I shoot. And that's a lie. And we got this mentality of this, how many sex people I can get to, or how many women I can please to make I feel ego. But then you have a baby and you don't even want the child. The mother, the young mama don't want to be no mother at that age. She haven't even accomplished herself. She's still living with her mama. That's one of the issues we're dealing with our community. We're trying to address the music, the movies, the allowing young girls to gyrate in music sounds that are vibrating low frequency, right? And so when the original sound of the lyrics come in, the original lyrics tell the young girl to suck this, to gyrate that, and do this. But they'll take the same sound and put an elementary nursery rhyme rhythm or lyrics with a song that was meant to talk about sex.
And that is happening every day, and more so even when I think about elementary kids in let's say dance class or what have you, and the type of songs that maybe when they dance, it's what do you call it? The explicit version is not being played. Yet and still it's the same song that was created in an explicit manner. And as a society, that just goes to show how we have normalized so much when it comes to this, and we have no clue about what's really happening when it comes to the undertones of the music and beats, 808 beats and things of that nature that have to do with embedding things into our psyche. As we wrap up here, what is healthy? Where can a person start to just try and inflict some healthy things into their own children at whatever age they're at right now, and then maybe if they're not dealing with kids, inflict some healthy things into their own life, knowing that they've been through some trauma?
I think modeling is really important. Loving yourself enough to be in a positive relationship, and giving yourself permission to get out of one if you made a mistake, or if somebody turned into somebody that you didn't know that they were, and not staying for the sake of the kids, recognizing that, it's important to have parents' involvement, but if somebody's abusive or not a positive relationship, doesn't want to have anything to do with those kids, that's not going to give them a sense of positive attachment and love. So find, a relationship, or have a relationship with yourself that allows you to take care of yourself, and by doing that, to take care of the kids.
So start there,
not to encourage divorce.
Let me give that a number. Number one, learn to love yourself. All right. Learn to value yourself. So for instance, when I look at myself, I don't at home eat off of paper or styrofoam plates, right? It's just a certain way that I tend to try to treat myself, right? So for me, that's a small thing that I do to value myself. I don't drink out of paper cups or plastic cups as much as possible, especially at home. At home, I'm always going to drink out of a glass. Why? Because I try to associate myself as a king. So even when it comes to certain passwords and things of that nature, it has that. I'm focused on that just the same, even in my passwords and such like that throughout the years, that might be.
Now everybody's going to be trying to figure out king passwords.
Don't worry. They can't. But with that in mind, I feel like, again, that should be number one, loving yourself enough to finding value in yourself, because starting with yourself is important, because you start looking on Instagram is more porn than the soft porn from Cinemax, and they were actually emulating sex then, whereas Instagram is just like, you just see everything for no reason, and it's unhealthy because that's not real booty. That's not real breast. That's not real hips.
Pro wrestling, like I said.
Those aren't real lips. And so it's just so unhealthy, as you dig into that. But loving yourself, I guess, would be number one when you're looking to heal. Okay, so what would be a number two?
Recognizing that you are not your wounds. You are not what happened to you.
Good.
You're a whole person, and just because something happened to you doesn't mean you don't deserve the same kind of positive experiences and self-esteem and confidence that other people have. You are whole and you can heal. And that's what we try to do in therapy, but also communities can help you heal. There can be support groups within your communities, within your churches, that kind of thing that might help you heal. You need to find your own way to make sense of that, but loving yourself also means taking care of yourself, and that doesn't mean like just baths and like buying fine leather goods or that kind of thing every once in a while. It means also recognizing that you are not your past, you are not what's happened to you, you are not your wounds, you are you, and a beautiful you. So that's 2, and then 3, I think, is education. Educating yourself, if you're not getting it from somewhere else. Reading books on healing. Bibliotherapy is really helpful. There's tons of stuff in the library. You don't have to buy stuff. You don't have to have money. As a community, doing more thing like Our Whole Lives, which is a program that is development of sex through the lifespan that churches can do. That is spiritually based, but like non-denominational. And so offering programs like that, offering more comprehensive sex education in general, talking to our kids about sex and about their boundaries and modeling that for them too. Those boundaries being in place, I think, are key components to putting some foundations in place and just doing the best you can to show love and compassion. There's a lot of hate in the world, especially right now. There's a lot of anger and conflict and irritability and power struggles. Trying to show your kids what actual love and compassion and kindness look like in the ways that you act and interact with your closest people and your tribe is really important, and making sure that people who don't act like that are not invited to be part of that community with you.
One more
and
question.
Protect yourself from that too.
One more question, and we kind of covered this a little earlier about an adult responsibility. A person's as an adult who have been abused. A lot of times, people do not actually know that they have issues, right? Because everybody normalized their own issue in their own brain. So a person who has been abused, it is important that they go seek therapy before they enter into a relationship, because that toxic abuse can carry over into them being an adult, and they'll carry that toxic relationship, that toxic abuse, into a new relationship and blame the new partner, and the partner don't even know what the hell happened. And so now the partner done been tainted with the toxicity. Now they got to go and get therapy themselves, right? Because they have pulled in their toxicity, and they didn't have nothing to do with it. They weren't born that way. I mean, they weren't abused, but then they get into a relationship with someone who was abused. That person who was abused never got help, and they blame the new person for all their problems. Now the relationship can't even get along because the new guy be like, "What? I didn't do nothing wrong. What I do?" He don't understand the triggers. Now he's got to go get therapy because he just got out of a relationship with a woman with a man or woman with a bunch of triggers. What isn't it their responsibility to go get some help before they take that toxicity into a new relationship?
Hey, real quick real quick, Michelle, John, you said something awesome then, and I took that and put it as number 1, and just change the chronological order here of things. But on the road to healing, first and foremost, recognize you have an issue. Okay. So ultimately, when you look at that,
what'd you say?
Got you.
What'd you say?
I said
she said she thinks self-love still comes first.
Because because you can't take responsibility for something if you don't give a shit about yourself, right?
Yeah,
You're not gonna take care of yourself and see your worth if you don't have some sense of your intrinsic value, right? You're not gonna do those things to make sure that you're not toxic if you already feel and internalize that you're toxic.
But I feel like if you don't first recognize you have an issue,
right,
then you won't even think about the fact that you don't have self-love. Because one thing I've noticed, and when someone doesn't recognize they have an issue, well, everything that they do is of a lower vibration. Therefore, they continue to attract everything around them that is lower vibration. So the friends that they have will allow them to be that lower vibration person.
It validates them. It validates
exactly. It validates them, and their friends will allow them to be that lower vibration person because that's what they attract. So they attract the people that are on the same low vibration as them. So because they have yet to recognize that they have an issue. It's only until they get some sort of awakening, whether it's another person coming into their life that can show them, a step up of what normalcy really is, and then kind of puts the mirror on them in their situation to where they're looking and noticing, man, I didn't realize it, but I'm down here in this low vibration pool, and everybody around me is on the same low vibration. So then I'm thinking, recognize that you have an issue first and foremost. When you get some sort of awakening to that, no matter how small, not minute, or how minimal it is, go with that. You need to look into that. You need to go dig and Google and figure out something as to that twinkle over there that you see that is of higher vibration, mirror showing you that you are, or that you do have an issue. And then 2, loving yourself. 3, recognize you are not your wounds or / your past. 4, education. I think, I'm not sure if you brought this book out, but I know Phyllis did as well.
Yes,
I feel like you mentioned a book as well. Our Bodies Ourselves.
Our Bodies Ourselves.
Is a very helpful publication for sex education. And then 5.
Yeah, they have a teen version now too.
They do. Okay. Awesome. 5. I added find healthy relationships to model. Right. So go. I can put it this way. When I was younger, my pastor Wellington Boone, out of Richmond, Virginia, Man of Christian Fellowship. He's now in Atlanta with the big church. He treated his wife like a queen. And he just put her on display as a queen. And it was a situation to where I remember him talking about trying to outdo their service to each other. Right. So they practice him trying to outserve her in the marriage, and her trying to outserve him in the marriage. But he treated her as such a queen, so that whenever she walked in a room, and because we had youth groups and things of that nature, if she walked in the room, we all treated her like a queen, because that's the way he treated her, and he put that on display. And with that in mind, so
and
that,
she received it. She received it too.
Exactly. And so that gave me the idea. Yep. No, you're right. And so in growing up, that's what I saw. And so that's what I emulated in growing up, is to treat a woman like a queen. Was I always the best at it? No. Did I always because I am divorced, and I can say that I could have been a better husband. Absolutely. And did I make mistakes? Absolutely. But at the same time, just like you learn some things, and then you go out into the world, you may not apply them all right away, but it's still there in your subconscious, and down the road you begin to apply those things. So maybe down the road someone gets the better of you than what other people had. But I don't know. You guys have any more thoughts as we begin to wrap up here? Anything last thing you want to say?
No, this was a great conversation, great topic. I appreciate you, Doc, for coming on, Michelle. definitely sharing this
Absolutely.
stage with us and building with us. Great, great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
And you know, and I think we're going to have to do this again because this is such a deep conversation that we can go. You know who I thought of, John, that I feel like we should had in addition that would make great conversation with Michelle as well is Tressie. You know, because she brings in the thought, you know, as a person who is a prophetess and was a pastor's wife, first lady of a church, and things of that nature. You know, she brings the idea of how religion or how the church should be more open to sex, as you spoke about, Michelle. So I think that would be a great conversation as well, and that we might put that together to have you both on. But real quick, Michelle, any last words there?
I was just gonna say, you know, related to what John was saying about, you know, go and seek help and don't spread the toxicity. If you are, you know, there's kids that are too young, there's people that are too young that aren't self-aware enough to know. So be responsible for the folks in your community and for your children too. If there's something going on, take them to therapy, give them support, love them regardless, and make sure that you're not spreading shame. And also in relationships, you know, I think that might be part of education, is normalizing healthy sex and also recognizing what's not healthy sex, what's dysfunctional. But that's something that we can teach our kids ourselves too. We don't need a system to do that for us. But I think just recognizing that sex is a positive and giving and a healthy thing, and giving permission for folks to explore that and talk about it with less taboo. My I made one T-shirt for my business, and it says michellestillwagon.com on the front, and on the back it says "Loosening the Bible Belt, one plan at a time."
I saw that.
I'm a preacher's kid, and this is the Bible Belt, and you know I have to encourage, or I don't have to, but I get to encourage women who have, you know, a lot of shame or guilt about knowing themselves or exploring their own bodies or feeling like that's not okay, or, you know, have had evangelical experiences that have taught them that it's all about the man and not to focus on themselves. You know, I've taught a lot of women in Louisville to masturbate, so you're welcome. But also, like, important for them to understand that loving themselves also means being okay with that. And for men too, like, it is okay to masturbate. And maybe that's something we need to teach our kids, so there's less teen pregnancy, that you can have pleasure, but when you're in a sexual relationship, you're responsible for it. And if you don't want to, you know, be responsible for it, then take care of yourself, brother. You know, take care of yourself, sister. Like, it's okay. But that's not something we spread you know, wide, and encourage as a sex, you know, non-sex positive community overall, just as a culture, you know, not necessarily Louisville, but you know, I do think being in the Bible Belt has those trips. There was something else I was going to say really quick, but I can't remember now.
I want to make sure that your website that we have scrolling at the bottom there is correct. It's michellestillwagon.com, MICHELLESTILLWAGON.com.
Yes, sir. That's it. Yeah, and I'm yeah, we do some other I do some groups and stuff for couples that is optimal sexual experiences. So if you want to enrich your lives, it's not always therapy is not always about, you know, problems or issues too. Sometimes it's about enrichment. And if you're treating your marriage and or your partnership and lovemaking and as a spiritual experience and as a positive, then and you're in that mature place that you can do that, then optimal sexual experiences might be something positive for you too.
Hey, John, I can see a Tipping Point show sponsored seminar or event where we bring Michelle in to speak to a lot of this and to perform some of her things that she's got going on with group therapy and such, as well as you know, getting you up there, John, to talk about things from the perspective, the science perspective that you do, as well. So, we probably should collaborate a little bit more and have that conversation.
It's a great topic. I'm glad you're educating the community this way. What a gift you're giving them. So thank you so much again for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you all, and I appreciate what you do in this world.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, folks, once again, that wraps up another after show episode of the Tipping Point Morning Show. And we will once again see you next week as we bring on another topic. And don't worry, we will revisit this one here because it is something that we need to talk about more. And see you guys.
Thank you so much.
You are listening to The Tipping Point Show with your host, Mr. Just Ask Joe, John Yeah. Right here on WLOU. Stream it live on Facebook and WLOUonline.com. And now, The Tipping Point Show.